The Semovente M40-75-18 stands as a remarkable yet often overlooked testament to Italian ingenuity in armoured warfare during World War II. Originally conceived not as a tank destroyer, but as a self-propelled gun to bolster artillery support, it swiftly evolved into a formidable opponent against early Allied tanks. Against the backdrop of thunderous M3 Grant and Sherman tanks, the Semovente's 75mm howitzer, firing potent heat shells, pierced through enemy armour with surprising lethality. Its low silhouette and reinforced armour masked a fierce spirit of innovation and desperation as Italian forces sought to counter the overwhelming firepower of Allied armour. Today we delve into the story of this remarkable machine, the underdog that redefined its fate in the brutal dance of armoured warfare. The early campaigns of World War II highlighted the weaknesses of Italy's armour. Painful defeats provided the evidence to High Command of the Regio Esercito that their tanks lacked firepower. The project for the Army's first carro pesante, a heavy tank, had been approved, but with no sign of any significant development. Italy, through Colonel Sergio Bellese, turned to its ally Germany for inspiration in military vehicle design. Bellese, an artillery colonel in the Regio Esercito, was particularly impressed by German military vehicles, especially half-tracks and assault guns, during his visits to German production plants, including one in Kiel. He admired the German heavy-duty half-tracks and sought to apply similar designs for Italian use. Bellese's exposure to German models led him to propose equivalent Italian vehicles. Bellese advocated for an Italian armed half-track based on German designs. He would later create a gun-armed half-track design, the Autocannone de 1953 su autocarro semicingolato Breda 61. The vehicle would be armed with the formidable Cannone de 1953. But there were no suitable half-track vehicles in Italian production during the war. The Regio Esercito were keen to repurpose existing tank chassis models into tank destroyers and howitzers, extending the life of obsolete vehicles. Colonel Bellese would continue to work on ideas. There had been another German vehicle that he was an admirer of, the StuG 3, and he quickly created blueprints for Italy's version of the StuG. The M1340 medium tank had been chosen to be converted to a self-propelled gun, a Semovente, around early 1941. Bellese's proposals had been put forward, including the Howitzer 75-18 on the hull of the M1340. There were other guns available, anti-tank guns, but the Regio Esercito decided on the 75-18 howitzer for the vehicle's intended support role. The Semoventi were to be developed for long range, similar to an Allied vehicle, the M7 Priest. Each Italian armoured division's artillery regiment were to receive a group of the new howitzers. Ansaldo were tasked with building wooden mock-ups of the Semovente, which were inspected by military officials. An order was placed in January 1941. The first prototype was built in February and the testing went well. Production commenced at the Ansaldo Fossati plant. Orders for the vehicles were not huge at first. The first order in January was for 30 vehicles, and by May 60 vehicles had been ordered. After further testing, it was decided that the Semoventi did not have sufficient armour to withstand the piercing rounds of the British 2-pounder gun. New armour plates were added for increased front strength, which slowed down production. Production on the M1340 chassis, designated as M40, would not continue for long. Italy had upgraded the chassis of the medium tank with the new designation M1441. Later in December 1941, 166 Semoventi were ordered on the M41 chassis. The armour of the Semovente M40-75-18's hull would be the same as the M1340. Nothing was changed. The Serie 3 model of the M1340 was chosen. This was the last of the M1340 Serie before the M1441 designation. The upper hull received significant development. The obvious change was the removal of the turret, the vehicle becoming a casemate. The front of the casemate would be reinforced with two 25mm armour plates welded together, making the armour 50mm at the front. The driver port also had 50mm. The sides and rear were 25mm thick, the roof 15mm. To the rear was the engine deck with a rear plate of 27mm and engine compartment roof of 10mm and 2 large inspection hatches. The casemate was of bolted construction, with armour plates bolted to the internal frame for fast construction and easier plate replacement. The upper hull front plate would have a spherical support in a round hole for the Obici 7518 gun. There was a vision slit for the driver to the left, which also had a hyperscope above, which allowed the driver to see outside while the slit was closed. The hyperscope gave the driver a 30-degree field of view. The suspension remained the same as the M1340, a semi-elliptical leaf spring suspension. On each side, a drive sprocket driven by the tank's frontal transmission. 2 suspension units, each with 2 small bogies, each bogie with 2 rubber wheels attached, 8 on each side in total. To the rear was the idler wheel, which featured a track tension adjuster that could manually adjust the position of the idler for tension. 3 rubber return rollers. The M1340's engine was also retained, the 8-cylinder liquid-cooled Fiat Spar 8T diesel engine with 125 horsepower. The engine was underpowered for the vehicle's weight, and it had reliability problems. The main armament was the Obici 7518, originally a field gun. The gun had been designed by Colonel Beleza, the man who designed the Semovente. The Howitzer would be modified to fit into the spherical support to be mounted in the front hull. The gun was placed slightly more to the right to give the driver positioned on the left more space. Gun traverse was 20 degrees to the left and 16 degrees to the right. Gun depression was at 12 degrees and elevation at 22 degrees. Secondary armament, surprisingly, was not the Breda Modello 38 but the Breda Modello 30. The Breda Modello 30 suffered from a slow fire rate and an awkward, time-consuming reloading operation, requiring the user to swing open a magazine that remains attached, load a clip of 20 rounds, remove the empty clip, swing the magazine back into the closed position, reload and fire. It was poor in the deserts of North Africa because it kept jamming. Lubrication used in the gun's chamber would collect sand and dust and clog up. Inside, the Semovente M40 to 7518 was very cramped. It had a 3-man crew of commander, driver and loader. In the centre was the gun's breech. On the left was the driver's foldable seat. In front of the driver were steering tillers and the vision slit with hyperscope above. Engine controls, including engine ignition, were to the driver's left. On the right of the breech was the commander's position, which was a small round seat. He would also be the gunner, firing the 75mm howitzer. In front would be the sighting system. This could be removed. The sighting system was vertical for sight from above the roof of the vehicle, while the commander remained safer inside the crew compartment. There was a small hatch on the roof that could be opened to allow the sighting system to poke out. The sighting system featured a reticle for aiming at targets. In front of the commander's position were cranks to position the elevation and traverse of the gun. The loader would be positioned to the rear and not only had the task of loading the breech of the gun, but also operating the radio in the rear of the compartment. By mid-1941, Semoventi were fitted with radios. The Apparato Ricevente RF1CA by Magneti Morelli. The multitasking made things difficult for both loader and the commander. Ammunition was stored in boxes behind the driver and commander positions. The box behind the driver also served as a seat for the loader. For anti-aircraft defence, the loader would mount the Breda Modello 30 on top and fire. Ammunition would be passed by either the driver or commander. Again, more tasks that hamper effective use of the vehicle. It would be impossible to fire the main gun at the same time. In mid-1941, Chief of Staff of the Regio Esercito, Mario Rowata, specified that 5 groups of the Semoventi could be organised. The vehicles were to be used for long-range support, not for assaults. A Semoventi group composed of 2 batteries. Each battery had 4 Semoventi M40 to 7518s along with 2 casemate Commando M40s, command tanks. The group would have 8 Semovente and 4 command tanks in total, plus 2 Semovente and 1 command tank in reserve. The group would also include a command section with staff cars, trucks and motorcycles. The organised Semovente groups saw action in North Africa. Performance in early engagements indicated that the vehicle may not be adequate for long-range support and was better suited to shorter-range assaults on tanks. Poor accuracy, limited range and a small field of fire had been noted. An encounter with Allied tanks that was successfully flanked and destroyed by Semovente would see its role on the battlefield change from artillery to tank assault support. It was a good idea that the Italian Semovente groups did not stick rigidly to Roata's documentation on how the vehicles should be used. The ammunition available to the 75-18 gun includes the Granata Perforante Modello 1932, a type of APC-BC shell, with penetration only around 40mm armour at 1000 metres. The velocity for this shell type is not the best, less than 500 metres per second, but with the Effetto Pronto shell, the low velocity did not matter. This was a type of heat shell created for the Italian army. It did not rely on high velocity for penetration. Instead, they used a shaped charge that could pierce around 100mm of armour at 1000 metres. This capability allowed it to effectively penetrate the armour of contemporary Allied tanks, such as the M3 Grant and M4 Sherman, which were otherwise difficult to defeat with conventional low-velocity guns. The Semovente M40-75-18 proved successful in its new role, taking part in successful offensives in the summer of 1942, particularly with the 132nd Armoured Division Arietta. The only problem for the Regio Esercito was there were a lack of Semovente for each armoured division. Demand increased, the M1441 was obsolete by mid-1942, and production was decreased with chassis diverted to the Semovente model M41. Some battalions were changed, mixing Caro M tanks with Semovente, a clear sign that the Regio Esercito saw the Semovente as assault armour supporting the medium tanks. The design of the Semovente de 75-18 had other benefits. It had advantages like a lower silhouette and thicker frontal armour compared to Italy's medium tanks, making it harder to hit and allowing for defensive ambush tactics. The Semovente was typically used in a direct fire role from concealed positions, where its firepower and protection outweighed its lack of speed and low gun velocity. It could be used for offensives on fortifications and entrenched infantry, or deployed in dug-in positions as part of defensive lines alongside the Caro M tanks to meet advancing Allied armour. Tank crews used various tactics to get the best out of the vehicle, including adding protection like track links and sandbags on the armour, especially the front. The Semovente seemed to look more intimidating with the added track links. Another tactic to boost survivability would be to dig a trench or small ditch for the vehicle to sit in, poking the 75mm over the ridge and only exposing the upper section of the casemate. This would make the Semovente a smaller target to the enemy and still be able to fire back. The low profile of this vehicle was an asset in the desert. There is various evidence from battlefield reports that proved that the Semovente M40-75-18 became the best frontline vehicle Italy had to combat Allied tanks in 1942. Though not positioned right at the front, they would be an assault support vehicle. A group of Semovente, along with M1340 tanks, presumably from the Arietta division, managed to repel an Allied attack by 30 M3 Grants and 10 M3 Stuarts at the Knightsbridge sector northeast of Bir Hakeim on the 10th of June 1942. The Allies lost around 20 tanks from 2 tank regiments, including 15 M3 Grants. The Italians only lost 2 M13s. Just before this engagement, the Semovente took part in the Battle of Bir Hakeim. A small group were part of the initial assault on the Bir Hakeim box. While around 30 M13 tanks were lost, only a few Semovente were destroyed. They would play a part in the continuing siege of the fortress that ended in victory for the Axis. This battle would see the vehicles used as assault guns for direct fire at the fortification. Months later, they were used by the Ariete to guard the retreat of the Italian-German army during the Second Battle of El Alamein, destroying a number of Allied tanks, including M3 Grants and M4 Shermans. During its successful combat service in North Africa, the vehicle boosted the survivability of the M13 and M14 tanks by providing the necessary firepower as assault guns. It gave the Italians a much better fighting chance, along with the deadly 90mm gun trucks for long-range support. The Semovente was not as good for long range as stated earlier, and could not perform the role equal to an M7 Priest or the German Vesper. It also lacked ammunition, with only 44 rounds that could be carried in the stowage. It lacked a coaxial machine gun, which meant that it was not a good vehicle for close combat infantry engagements. The biggest drawback of all was the lack of Semoventi available to Italy's armoured divisions. Only 60 of the M40 model were built, and each armoured division received only a small group of the vehicles. It would not be enough to make a significant impact and turn the tides at El Alamein, where the Axis lines started to crumble. The Semovente M40-75-18 was a successful conversion of the obsolete M1340 tank. Italy had successfully repurposed a tank chassis to extend its life, an important strategy for Italy's constrained resources and industrial production. They could not afford to waste vehicles and send materials to the scrapyard. The Semovente M40-75-18 had similar firepower to early StuG 3 models, although the StuG possessed a few superior technical characteristics. But Italy had to improvise and adapt, rather than designing and building a vehicle from scratch. Following the M40's success, the Italian army developed more powerful self-propelled guns to address the increasing threat of better armed Allied tanks. This led to the creation of vehicles mounting longer barrel and higher caliber guns, continuing the Semovente concept but with improved armament and chassis modifications. There were tank destroyers such as the Semovente de 75-34 and 75-46. These variants featured longer barrels and higher velocity guns, such as the Cannone de 75-46, originally an anti-aircraft gun converted for tank use. The 75-46 especially represented German influence, with a more powerful gun capable of defeating thicker armour. These vehicles retained the low silhouette and casemate configuration on a later chassis, but with improved firepower and armour protection. The Semovente de 105-25 assault gun, built in 1943, was developed as a vehicle to support the Kawamato P40. The 105mm L25 Howitzer was mounted on a modified M1542 chassis, which was redesigned for this purpose, including increased width and lowered hull for better gun fitting. This model emphasised powerful infantry support and capable anti-tank firepower, with heat shells capable of penetrating up to 120mm of armour. Although crew members were still only 3, increasing commander workload, it was a logical continuation of the Semovente concept, focusing on firepower and survivability. All these later vehicles followed the basic Semovente doctrine established by the M40: low profile, turretless, casemate style self-propelled guns, designed primarily for infantry support and anti-tank roles. This configuration offered better armour protection than medium tanks and maintained a lower silhouette, making them harder targets. The improvements in armament and chassis design across the 75-34, 75-46 and 105-25 models built directly upon the tactical and technical foundations of the Semovente M40-75-18, embodying an evolution of the concept rather than a departure from it. While originally designed for infantry support, the Semovente 75-18 75mm howitzer excelled in an anti-tank role, challenging medium tanks of the era and earning a reputation as Italy's most respected armoured fighting vehicle of the war. It demonstrated Italian ingenuity in adapting existing tank chassis into effective combat machines.